Hi, everyone. Happy Friday, and welcome to today's Visas.AI Attorney Collab. Today is the 17th of November, and we're joined by some wonderful attorneys and non attorneys, including myself. Thanks for joining. I would love to get us started today just by going around the room and asking everyone to introduce themselves and tell us about their practice, and then we can get started with our spotlight attorney. So I'll pass the mic over to Yesh.
Hi, good morning, guys. My name is Yesh Vasansetti. I work both immigration and tax, or I'm experienced in both immigration and tax law. Currently, I'm working a lot of immigration cases, mostly H-1Bs. We recently had our second round lottery completed, and now it's just coming back and catching up with things that we've put on hold to meet, the last H-1B cap season. So that's what's going on in my world.
Yeah, so are you seeing any RFEs on these H-1Bs? And if so, what kind of issues are you facing?
Yeah, so the RFEs that we see right now, a lot of them are employer information. So we're seeing a lot of requests for evidence from USCIS, asking about company details to see what their lease looks like, to see what, the workspace for these offices look like. Um, just to see if these companies that are actually trying to get these workers over are real and if they're a solid company or if it's just like a front that people are putting up. So that's a lot of what we're seeing right now. Not so much of the multiple registrations that everyone was really worried about. Yeah.
We had talked a few weeks ago about the insertion of the vibe component. This was something we had seen for years in the L arena. Vibe is some letters comprised to basically go back to a Dun and Bradstreet database to determine if companies were related under the L. But are you seeing it vibe requests on H-1B companies now?
A little bit. Yeah, basically when they're asking for employer information, they're also just trying to see if VIBE actually stands for Validation Instrument for Business Enterprise. So it's a tool through Dun and Bradstreet, and you get like a specific number for your company when you register on there. So some of them we are seeing requests for to see if you are validated on Vibe, and we just try to see. When I talk to the employers, I let them know that, hey, why don't you just go ahead and make that payment and get yourself validated, get your number, and give me a screenshot where it validates you on that. So that's something that I see, but not as much as just USCIS trying to see what your office is, where it is, do you have a lease? Are you even paying like utility bills? Just to see that you're actually running it on a day basis. We do see people coming in all of these there's a bunch more site visits that are happening recently. Just if there's a case where there was a 221G issued out in India, and then a week later we had an officer come in to the
Right.
employer, to the office and say, ask all these questions. They're just knocking on doors, obviously unannounced, at random times of the week to see if you're really there,
So
essentially.
what you're saying is you're seeing a coordination between RFEs, site visits, also 221Gs. Are they all working
Yes.
hand in hand? That's
Yeah.
interesting. Well, thanks. That's great feedback.
Thank you.
Back to you, Pierre.
Very good feedback. Thanks, Yesh, and thanks, John. Ashley, thank you for joining today and welcome. This is your first time joining, and you are our
Yeah.
spotlight attorney today.
Hi, thanks for having me. So my name is Ashley Morin. I've been practicing business immigration exclusively for the past 8 years. My current practice mostly deals with more complex business immigration cases, the L's, the EB1s, twos, and threes, and a little bit of perm.
That's exciting. I love it. I heard the buzzword EB1. I'm
Yeah,
happy to hear
those
that.
are my favorite.
That's awesome. Roberto, thanks for joining our attorney collab. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello all. I am Roberto. Been practicing immigration law, I think, for around 6 months now. I'm a licensed attorney also in Colombia. Um, Recently, I've been shadowing John, uh, learning the process, seeing him conduct intake, and I've also been working on a couple of O visas and H3s. Which are kind of interesting. I've never done this before, but getting to learn them is has been really fun.
Uh,
Excellent.
to jump in on that, I've really enjoyed getting to know Roberto. What's really cool about God the practice of law and the evolution of it is Roberto's in Colombia, and he's barred in the United States. Went to school here, obviously speaks English very well, but he's in another country, and it's unique. Immigration's unique because people are obviously coming from another country, coming to this country, and we can get the business either way. We can either get the business in America, or people who want to come here or already here and want to stay, or you can do the business from the country that they're originally in. And Roberto's seeing a really interesting uptick in the demand for immigration for Colombians, and really fun to work with him to figure out how to approach that market.
Yes, very much looking
Very
forward to that.
exciting. It's very
Yeah.
exciting. And so, Roberto, you've already had experience while shadowing John to work on the O1. You said, is that one of the visas you've worked on?
Yes, but I've seen him. I think we had a couple of O's, and I was present during an EB1 intake, if I'm correct.
It's lovely.
Um,
Yeah, one of the things that we've done, it's been fun, right, is that this is what we do to bring in clients, right? So we use our technology, the Visas.AI application, and we'll have a conversation with a client. And sometimes they know what visa they want, sometimes they don't. We ask them some preliminary questions, and then the O1's extraordinary ability, EB1's extraordinary ability. So Roberto and I, we call them drive-alongs, right? This is a term of art that police officers use when they take civilians to go see what their life's like. So Roberto did a drive along with me, and we talked to some potential clients and evaluated them using the questions in Visas.ai to determine whether they were met the standard. And what's really cool about it is we've effectively taken the old yellow pad with the, this is a small version of it, where you're writing chicken scratch and hoping you can remember where you put it, and putting it into a digital format. So with that strategy session, it's questions and answers. So it's a real collaboration, which is really kind of what we're doing here. This is why we call this collab. So the collaboration with the client, but then they can see the questions that you'd asked them and the answer that they provided, and importantly, for extraordinary ability, if they still have anything they need to go get, right? So sometimes you can tell them, hey, you could pick up a membership in an association. Here's what it requires, right? And then write those notes. And what's really cool, and Pierre, we had this experience, is you can have those scenarios and people come back. And I remember it took a while for us to get to point to help you until you had went out and did that stuff. But using the Visas.ai strategy, as a really a checklist, as a to do or what I need to accomplish list, and then come back, and that's one of the funnest things, because I don't have a great memory. I love to like reopen it and see, oh, okay, now I remember who you are. Here's the notes I took, and we're not starting over at square one again. So one of the coolest features is that, and makes it fun to do. So I've really enjoyed Roberto on the ride-alongs, and he's ready to go on his own now. I wouldn't mind doing a ride-along with you and see how you do it. But I was glad to help you and anybody else in that way.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing, guys. And I'd love to circle back on the EB1 conversation and the extraordinary ability visa through Visas.ai later
Mm-hmm.
on. But maybe since Ashley, you've had experience with those, the biggest questions we usually get to the collab itself when it comes to extraordinary ability is how does one know how to see what specifics, in all the categories that they fit in. So from your experience, from a different perspective, what do you do to usually assess someone's criteria?
So my main practice is EB1C. So I'm dealing more with multinational managers and executives. I've evaluated people for EB1As, but none of my clients have qualified for those. So I'm familiar with the factors that you have to go through, but it's not in my everyday practice.
I got you. No, that
Why
makes
don't we
sense.
just evolve it into the EB1C though? I mean, let's go to your Ballywick. Tell us what you're looking at when you're trying to. Well, one, a lot of people don't know what we're talking about. And we can easily get into the weeds. Tell us what an EB1C is. Tell us what the non-immigrant version of that, and tell us what those factors are to and whether somebody meets it or not.
Yeah. So an EB1C is for a multinational manager or executive, which are two different routes that you can take. Depending on whether they're doing the more of the day-to-day management of, multiple levels of personnel, that would be more on the manager side. Or if they're doing more of directing the entire company or a function of that company, that would be more towards the executive side. It can be hard to determine one or the other. But the non-immigrant version of that would be the L1A, which is what I also deal with. So I feel like those really go hand in hand. And a lot of the people that come in on L1As eventually end up getting EB1Cs. So
That's what the difference is. Can you go immediately to an EB1C, or do you have to do an L1 first? And if you do, how long? A lot of people ask us those questions. What's your insight on that?
yeah, so generally people would want to adjust their status. So they're coming in on the L1A and then applying for the EB1C in order to eventually
So an
adjust their
adjusted status
status.
is the process to go from a non-immigrant visa like an L into a green card, an EB stands
Permanent
for
resident.
employment-based, right? Which
Right.
is permanent residency. So I assume one of the factors on why you would do an L instead of an EB1C is speed. How fast can you get an L? How long does it take to get an EB1C?
So EB1Cs are generally taking around 9 months. I usually say 12 months to, give some wiggle room, but about 9 months. And L, you can premium process and have that done sooner.
Oh, and EB1C doesn't have premium processing. I mean, not for the I-485.
It does, right? So
For
here,
the
this is
I-140,
this is what look. It's a bad plan, and so you can see how people misconstrue it all the time because they're like, I'm paying premium, I should get whatever I'm asking for, right? But in the green card component, the I-140, which is the whole analysis of whether or not they're an international executive or manager, you can premium process that, and that can be premium processing is 15 business days, right? So it's really quick. However, the adjustment of status can't be premium processed, which is ironic because there's really less things to look at there. I think one of the reasons they don't do it though is because that's where they try to determine if you're a criminal or a terrorist and that sort of thing. Now, ironically, most people have been in the United States for years already. So if they're going to do something criminal, they probably already would have done it. And maybe they should make an exception for them, but they have to take your fingerprints and send it out to all these, three initialed agencies, Politburo, whatever, and find out if you're a bad guy. And maybe that's why they don't do it. But all they're really doing is determining, have you worked illegally or have you, been out of status? You think that they could do that within the same 15 days, but they don't. So when you're asked, attorneys, about premium processing, make sure you tell your clients that that's not for everything. You're not going to get your green card in 15 days. You're going to get a component of it. And many of them don't understand that distinction. And many of us get tied into the weeds and we're like, oh yeah, well, of course that's only that. And they're like, well, why didn't you tell me? It's like, well, you didn't ask me the right question. So that's what we're here to talk about. Thank you, Ashley. So one of the components, the distinction between the L1 and the EB1C is how long the companies have had a relationship. Is that correct?
the foreign entity and the US entity?
Right.
Yeah.
Don't the companies for an EB1C have to have been an international company for 1 year before you can file it? But if you're doing an L1, you can set that company up and go for the L1 as soon as you want to go for it. You don't have to have
Correct. Yeah.
If
Most of my
somebody-
clients have been established, so that's not so much the case for them. For them, the people that I'm dealing with are very high level, so they might not want to jump into an EB1C. They might not be sure that they want to be permanent residents of the US. Plenty of them are happy in France and Brazil and wherever it is that they live. They're just coming for, 3 years, and then they're going to make a determination as to whether they want to go home or they want to stay here and become permanent residents. So most of my clients come in on Ls, and then we end up doing their EB1s.
So it's really fun because with immigration, there are so many different ways to be immigration attorneys, but even within a same visa type, there's different things. And what Ashley's talking about here, for those that aren't following the nuance of it, is that she's been dealing with really big companies that have been established a long time, and they're just moving people between them. I always use this analogy all the time. It's, if you have a Hilton in Paris, then you can send the manager to the Hilton in New York. That's a multinational company that's sending people over there. Those are fairly easy things to do, but there's a whole nother element of it, and that's the new company or the merged company, right? So the new company is somebody that's established a company in their foreign country and wants to bring that company to America. So when we're helping people on these strategies, they're not coming to us saying, I want to do an L. What they're doing is they're coming to you and they're saying, I want to come to America. And we're going through process of elimination of different visa types. So many times the first time they've ever heard of this is coming from us, where we're going, well, tell me about the company you have. Well, I've got 20 employees. I make $3 million, which maybe not a lot in America, but in my small country, it's a massive amount. And we're looking at it. Okay, would you like to establish a company in the United States? So if you do, then you can actually transfer yourself if you're an executive or manager. Well, I'm the managing director. We're like, well, what does that mean? Well, okay, does this? Oh, well, that's like a CEO in America. And so we're doing this analysis for whether somebody can start a company up. And there's a really interesting thing about that part of it, right? That Ashley, in the way you're doing it, you'll never face, right? And it's the, is this really real analysis, right? And so the conversations we have a lot are for people who are like, well, let me set up a company, and then once they give me the visa, then I'll start hiring people. We're like, they're never going to approve an idea. They just won't. So there are some best practices that we like to use, and I think it'd be a good opportunity to talk about it, is that, okay, number one, you have to have a company. So that's incorporating it, right? Well, but just incorporating a company takes about a week. It's pretty simple. They're not going to give you a visa just because you have that sitting on a shelf. You actually, in my opinion, need to rent space, and you need to hire people. And I think you need to hire, if you want to get these approved, and we've never had one denied, is 3 levels of employees. So that's an executive level, a managerial level, and a frontline worker level. And in order to do that, I think the lowest number that makes any sense is 5. 3 definitely doesn't make sense. You can't have one executive, one manager, and one worker. Why would you need the manager? Right. And the other thing is that you really need to help the executives and managers understand those roles shouldn't be primarily the producers of what you're doing, but they can be to a certain level. For example, I'm a lawyer. I could have an international company. I'm still going to practice law, but I also have to be overseeing and be doing executive things and then have managers below me. So a lot of people are like, I have to hire 5 people and open a space. I'm sitting in another country. How do I do that? Well, there's a couple of options there. Number one, do you know anybody? Can you hire anybody that would help you do that? Or do you want to come over to the United States on a B1, B2, or an ESTA and set those things up? And then, so that's a really interesting thing to do, because it's sort of at odds with what that visa's for, but it's where immigration takes the better of 2 evils, right? So what immigration approves is somebody that enters on a B1, B2 while in America, incorporates their company, gets a federal ID number, goes into a bank, gets a bank account, wires money into her account, goes, rents a space, hires all these different people, actually has the company making money, and they can be making money, which seems at odds with what a visitor visa is all about. And as long as they go from that into applying for the L1, or if they go out of the country and come back in, they're good. What makes it complicated is when they do all that and they leave the country and then they try to come back in again on the B visa, maybe more than once. We get those nightmare calls all the time. Well, I set this company up. I've been going back and forth, and they said they looked at my LinkedIn page and saw that I owned a company, and they're like, yeah, that's a problem. You can't say you're coming in to be a visitor and own a company in America, right? So our strategies, if we're telling them they can do that, have to include, if you do all that stuff, make sure you come and go all the way through, because if you come back and forth, you're going to probably cause yourself a problem. So Ashley, that's a little bit different edge of the L spectrum from you, but we see those a lot, and we get them a lot on these strategy calls that Roberto and I are talking about, where we don't know them at all, right? And we're just trying to tell them ways they can come over here, and we'll throw that out. We'll see if they're from an E2 country, and if they don't want to do all that, then the E2 allows them to just kind of set it up and invest in it, and maybe they can go down from 5 to 1 or 2. And then the E2 has the thing where you just can't create a job for yourself in your company. So you can't be the one-man show, as they say. So somebody might be a lawyer or accountant or a consultant, and they just, I'm going to set this up and I'm going to work out of my apartment. That won't work. You need to have other people that do the day-to-day. So we're then giving advice. Get a glorified secretary, call them an office manager, have them be head of your sales, but it can't just be you. So that's the, the spectrum or the different analyses that we can do as we go into these different visa types. Here, sorry to Shanghai the conversation.
I love it. It's great. That's the whole point. A collab. When we're collaborating and having those conversations. So why don't we dive back into the conversation of what we've all worked on, and what we're currently working on, rather than our experience. So Ashley, maybe you can get us started with what you're currently working on, and then we can have more conversations about that.
Yeah, so I have one very large client that I do the EB1Cs and the L1As generally. I've done a few L1Bs for them, but nothing recently. And now I'm started working on a smaller client, a startup, and we're working on getting Ls for them and making the determination between, whether it's going to be an L1A, personnel manager, functional manager, whether we'll have to pursue maybe an L1B route.
Take us through that analysis, right? So what we'd love to hear from you is how do you think about it? What are some of the factors? You don't have to disclose any confidential information, but just, what this is for other lawyers to watch and say, okay, I get it. Ashley told me I need to do this and this and this.
Yeah.
Take us through your thought process of, and you can use the facts.
Yeah. So generally the first thing I want to look at is an org chart, because if they have, multiple levels of people below them, then I know I can be looking at a personnel manager, which is, in my opinion, the most straightforward kind of case. If you're dealing with a first line manager or a functional manager or even an L1B, there's, additional complications there. So if I can go the L1A personnel manager route, I will. So the first thing I'll look at is the org chart. The next thing I want to look at are, the job duties or the job description to see if their job duties are primarily managerial or if they're performing the day-to-day tasks. And if the org chart doesn't look great, then I also want to see if maybe what they're doing, they might not classify it as a function, which is just kind of a USCIS word that, not a lot of companies, it's not an industry standard word. So they might not know that they're a functional manager when in reality, that is what they're doing. So I'll look at that to see if, if we can't go the personnel manager route, that if we can take the functional manager route. Now, if neither of those work, and it looks like they're more of a technical person or expert where they're applying specialized knowledge, particularly if there's proprietary processes that they deal with, then we're going to be looking at more of an L1B.
So with the startup that might have a lot of people wearing a lot of hats, what are some techniques as an attorney you can do to help your client understand what the different types of categories are, to help them define what they've done, which they have to have already done, and what they're going to do so it meets the L1, as opposed to just saying, give me the job description and I'll tell you whether it works or not? What are some things that you can do to
Well, I like
help?
to give them the factors that we're looking for,
Right.
because they need to know what it is that we're trying to prove. I think just looking at the job duties and saying, this is an L1A, give me XYZ, doesn't always help. But they know better what these people have done, and they've had to have already done it, because we need, supporting documents from the foreign experience for that year. So
I think that's what really distinguishes great attorneys from good attorneys, or even bad ones, are, taking them to the law, showing them what the law is and what it needs to be, and then helping them understand, if you want to bring this person over, because most of the time they're thinking of people, not positions, right? They're like, I'm moving my company to America. I want to have these people with me. And they're just like, get it done, lawyer.
mm-hmm.
And that's not, we can't just make stuff up for them, right? It's a collaboration, to go back to the name of the show. How do you collaborate with these folks to help them understand as? Take us through I don't know, an anecdote of, conversations with clients to help them do that. Maybe some things you've done in the past or things that you want to do, could do.
So a lot of the time, the org chart isn't showing everyone. A lot of people don't understand exactly what an indirect subordinate is because they don't deal with those people on a day-to-day basis. Their subordinates are managing those people on a day-to-day basis. So a lot of the time, just explaining to them, I need everyone that reports to the people who report to you. You might not do their performance reviews. You might not deal with them on a daily basis, but they are, in fact, your indirect subordinates. That can help to, if you're kind of on the border between whether or not they're a first line manager or not, oftentimes that helps. In terms of the functional managers, if you just go to someone and say, you are a functional manager, because functional manager isn't a word that's used a lot in the industry, they're going to say, no, I'm not.
Right.
So I like to, the factors are pretty clear, but I like to, break them down and explain them in lay people's terms. Like, this is what we have to prove. This is what USCIS is looking for. And then I like to get pretty creative in terms of what kind of supporting evidence we can use. Because I think that if you just stick to a script that is the same for everyone, that oftentimes they're just going to say, I don't have any of that. But they probably do have something else, whether that's, reminding team members to listen to the security protocols that they put in place, or maybe they don't sign contracts, but they, work with vendors and there's, obtaining quotes. So it's very fact specific.
It is, and those are two examples that are great, right? So in the functional manager component, we're talking about discretion, right? So a manager of a function or an area or a division, that's what all this really is different than just an employee, because they're going to have discretion, right? They're going to have discretion to expend budgets. They're going to have discretion to hire and fire, and those sorts of things. And what's really interesting is they don't have to do all of that to meet that. So sometimes if you ask them, hey, do they have discretion to expend the budget? The knee-jerk reaction the CEO says is no. But I'll say, wait a second. Have they ever entered into a contract with a vendor? Well, sure. I said, well, doesn't that bind the company? Yeah, it binds the company. Okay. Well, they don't bind the company on everything, but if they bind them on anything, you've given them that discretion, right? That you wouldn't give the receptionist maybe, or some other person below them, but this person has some authority. And I think being lawyers and asking those questions instead of just, and helping the client understand is really, I think, doing the best job we can do. So that's really cool. To go to discretion of expending budget, right? They no, they never expend a budget. Really? Do they ever buy any of their own equipment? Do they ever take clients out to dinner? Do they ever take their team out to dinner? Oh yeah, they do that all the time. Well, that's expending the budget. And what you can do is like, okay, show me the P&L and show me the budget that you have. What part of that budget does this person get to expend? And then you're like, okay, I can make an intellectually authentic argument that this person has discretion to expend part of the budget that the company has. And those are things of knowing the questions to ask, right? And the way you know the question to ask is going to the regulations and the memos, right? Where the regulation says they have to be a functional manager. What's really amazing to me is how few lawyers have read the memos that USCIS instructs their adjudicators on how to look at it, right? It is the blueprint on this is what these people are being told. Understand what they're being told, and now you know where the goal line is, right? Go there, and if it says a functional manager does A, B, and C, when you're looking at your job description with your employer, you're asking them, does A, B, and C? And if it doesn't do all three of them and it needs to do all three of them, you're like, well, could it, right? Has it ever? Those are the questions you do that. Now, we don't want to lie, but there's a long way between lying and talking your client through to understand something. And what I think lesser attorneys do on this is they just go to the client and say, give me the job description. And then they look at it, and without having any conversation, they go, not good enough. Or worse, looking at it without any conversation, giving it to the government, who says, now, not good enough. And then the government says there's an RFE because they know what their memo told them to do, even though the attorney didn't know. And they're saying you're missing A, B, and C. And now you got to go back to the client and redo a job description that's different. And sometimes that works if you're vague enough. But what's problematic is when you're
and you get that RFE.
Yeah, where the RFE, if you didn't put anything in at all, it's a lot better than you said it was these 10 things. And now you're saying it's these other 10 things and it's not those 10 things, right? So that's, I think, the hint to take out of this conversation, anybody that hadn't done L1s or immigration, is what do the laws say? Law is first regulations, second memos, third AAO decisions, fourth case law. That's instructive. And then knowing what that is and informing your clients what they need to hit to be successful is a lot better than give me what you got. I'm going to put it in there and we're going to roll the dice, hope it gets approved. If it doesn't, it's not my fault. And there's a lot of us that go like that, right? And I just think we can be better if we do these other processes, which aren't hard, honestly. It's just really knowing what the roadmap is.
And also, a lot of times these job descriptions are from when they hired for that position, which could be years ago, and that person has moved up. They've taken on a bunch more complex tasks, and it just hasn't been updated. So a lot of the time, I find that just if the company is fine with it, talking to the beneficiary themselves and getting their take on it, because they'll be like, oh, well, yeah, I'm doing all of those things. They didn't tell you that. So
Love that. And this brings up another thing that is a pointer and a nugget you can take away. Those things are not written in stone, right? We are not obligated to say this was the job description, so we have to give that to the government, because honestly, they're different questions. Hiring somebody for a job and putting it out there is a completely different question than what are they doing in that job. And as you said, what does that job evolve to? Number two, that job description might give, 50% of what that job really is, right? Somebody wrote it up in HR. They're not the people that managed it. They said, these are the things we kind of want. When they get in there, they're going to do whatever. And what they do is a different thing, right? This is descriptive to the government. And what you can do to be accurate, right, is you get somebody that's a supervisor to go back and say, here's what they did. So you're not bound to the job description. You're bound to a discussion of that agreement. And what you could do is say, here's a contract, and it vaguely talks about what they're going to do. They're called this and they're going to do that. But it's that letter that goes through and tells everybody what that job is, right? And then they're signing off on it. So understanding there's a different audience and it's a different thing. And what jumped in my mind the other day when you get the org charts aren't always correct for two reasons. One, somebody, again, just threw it together. It doesn't mean that it's really accurate. Number two, it isn't an org chart for immigration purposes, right? So, for example, when we were talking about managers, Ashley, right? So a manager ideally is going to supervise at least one person under them that's also supervisory, right? That's perfect. Now, have we gotten away with it sometimes where they're not? Sure. But it's not always flat, even though it appears to be flat. So you have the manager of the department and then you got all the people. But sometimes you have senior levels of those people and junior levels of those people.
Yeah.
And in reality, that senior person is doing a lot of the management of the others underneath them, right? And not just flatly dealing with all of them, right? There are people that know more than others because they've been there longer. They don't go to the actual manager. They go to the person in their role that just knows it better to them. And if you think about it and you say, is that really happening in your company? There's nothing wrong with redesigning what somebody else had done as an org chart to indicate that, right? That's not a lie. It's just an evolution, and it's a different framing of what you're doing for a different purpose. And if anybody was ever to investigate it, they would see that that's accurate, right? And so you're making accurate reflection of reality, even though some org chart that was created a long time ago for a different purpose might also exist.
Yeah.
So a couple hints. So
there's a big difference between, what is industry standard and used in actual business and what USCIS is looking for. That's also factual.
That's right. And we're permitted to make those changes, and we're permitted to make those suggestions, and we're not doing anything wrong by doing it. And I think it's that part that attorneys get stuck, right?
Mhm.
They're like, well, who am I to tell them what their company's organizational chart are? Well, you're the person that knows the law and where it's supposed to go. And if you ask the right questions, then you can evolve that evidence, right? It's not that there is nothing in the law that says an organizational chart can't be updated. Right. And I think that's where people get stuck. It's like, I can't go there, and they don't think to go there. They don't think to try to solve the problem. They just said, my job is to take it and give it to the government, and the government's going to do it. Well, what we know is the government is looking for ways to knock these cases down, and they're going to find these things, even for really good companies that are doing a really good job. And that is always shocking to them. Don't you know that we make this amount of money and we have this amount of employees? How dare you say that our visa isn't approved? Well, the government adjudicator is looking at it, it's like, well, it doesn't connect all the dots.
John,
And
sorry
I
for
had this
cutting you off.
conversation with a professional sports team that just did not want to provide anything. They're like, we're not doing it. I'm like, it's just going to the government. They're like, don't care. You got to get it done without this and this and this. And the literally, it wasn't arrogance as much as, we just don't do that. And that's our company culture. And there's nothing you can tell us that's going to change that. That's the challenge of the big company versus the little company. Will give you anything they want, listen to you. The big company's like, we're not changing anything. It is what it is. They don't want it. That's your problem.
Yeah, that's been my experience with the bigger companies. And I've also found that the higher the level the person is, the less they're willing to give you.
100%.
We have some questions coming in, guys. Sorry to cut you off, but
no, it's great.
We usually get so much into it, we forget the questions. So currently, one of our viewers is asking, what is an L1? I'll read the full question or questions, and then I'll let you comment on it. What is an L1 blanket processing? If I have an active petition documentarily qualified for CR1 marriage visa and just waiting for interview at an embassy, and my company is now offering me to transfer to its headquarters in the US through an L1, is that okay? Would the embassy refuse the company's request for an L1 because I'm waiting for an interview for my marriage green card?
Great question. Why don't you answer this, Ashley?
Yeah, so I wasn't clear on what was going on with the family-based portion, but in terms of the
pending interview for marriage case, been waiting. Company is offering now the ability to come in on an L1 blanket.
Okay, so if your company already has a blanket, then that's something you could do. You'd want to look into the timing, or ask the company's immigration attorney to look into the timing for you, because I'm not sure how long you've been waiting for your family-based interview, and it's entirely possible that is going to come up, sooner than your L1 interview would come up. And if you're doing a blanket and consular processing it, then the company would put together a petition. They would probably go through USCIS and get it approved, and then you would take the approval notice and everything to the consulate and go from there.
Can we back up a second? Again, we can get in the weeds really quick. Take us through, what is a blanket L1?
So a blanket, if a company has a blanket, they're a large company that regularly transfers employees back and forth. So USCIS allows them to go through a process to give them a blanket L that would cover everyone. So you can apply, through that blanket or under that blanket.
Back up a little bit more. What is the blanket, and how do you get one?
So the blanket is an approval notice that covers, all of your employees to be able to come, assuming that they otherwise qualify for an L, to come in using that approval notice.
Okay. And are there any requirements that are relaxed if you have a blanket over if you were doing a straight up L1 on your own?
So you don't have to prove qualifying relationship if the company's on that blanket. Generally, I still submit, qualifying relationship docs just to make sure all the bases are covered. But it is technically, if any company that you're working for is listed on that blanket, then the qualifying relationship has already been established and approved by USCIS.
Do they have to go through USCIS first, or did you send them into the consulate appointment with the
If
document?
you have a blanket, you do not have to go through USCIS first.
So they, okay,
You can go directly to the consulate with that blanket and your consular processing
Wow,
application or
so
never
does
heard
it
of
packet.
that.
immediately
Awesome.
go for a blanket, or does it have to have done certain number of L's first, or
It has
what
to have done, I don't remember offhand what the number of L's is, but you do have to have done a certain number first.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Sorry to spotlight on very precise legal
Yeah,
questions.
I think I rushed through that. I was kind of focused more on the family based
Sure.
part. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, and what I think what their question here is, and what this is a great thing in Collab, we can all jump in and talk about it. So they've got an interview, they're waiting. So basically, your question was right. How long have you been in line? What are your expectations? So sometimes these things can drag forever. The L1 on a blanket means they don't have to wait to go to USCIS first. So it's how long would it take to get an appointment to go to the consulate, right?
hmm
That's all it
Which,
would take.
yeah.
Well, could be
And
longer or shorter depending on the consulate, right? And
yeah.
those are factors that we don't know. That obviously, I'm sure we could talk to this person about if they wanted to. But some consulates are 5 days out, some are a long way out, and are they in the country, their home country, or are they in another country, right? And we know that some countries are taking third country nationals and some aren't. So those are all factors too, but it would assume that if there is a delay of any time to get that family based one because of the blanket, if the company already has a blanket, getting in for a consular appointment in most countries should probably be significantly faster than what they're doing, but it depends on how long they've been waiting for that appointment. And here's the other thing: what kind of family based visa are we
hmm
talking about, right? So, um, anyway, great question, Pierre. And of course, lawyers will come back with more questions than answers sometimes, but
Yes.
those are because there's other factors to think about.
Well, that's
Coming
great.
Yeah.
Why don't we end today's collab before we give our final thoughts?
in.
Actually, we love to ask attorneys that join us why they got into immigration and how they got into
Oh,
law.
great
I think
question.
that's a really, really beautiful question to know the background of it. So maybe usually we start with that, but today we'll be ending with that.
Yeah, so I lived in Chicago for almost a decade and I went to law school in Chicago. So I had an opportunity to meet a lot of immigrants. They were all very wonderful people, and hearing their stories on how they ended up here, I always thought was super interesting. And then in law school, I took a immigration law legal writing clinic, and my professor was amazing. And I was really into it. I found it fascinating. So right out of law school, I ended up getting a job with a very, very large business immigration firm on a temporary basis. I was a very new grad and fell in love with it. I was like, this is for me. So I have practiced business immigration exclusively since I graduated law school.
Wow, it's
Very cool.
amazing. It's great. Thank you so much for that, and thank you for joining
Yeah.
today. Why don't we go around and give our final thoughts on today? Anything you guys want to leave the audience with and other attorneys with? Maybe we can start with Yesh again.
Thanks, Pierre. Um, Final thoughts. Well, it's always great coming into the collab, just learning about different things. A lot of what I do is H's, but this is I guess this environment is where I can learn about other types of visas. Like the L's is not something that I handle on a daily basis, but it's great to learn some insight. And I feel like a lot of what the companies do for the H is very similar to what they do for the L's in terms of like making sure that you have, a certain number of employees before you start filing, or, how your organizational charts are set up and stuff. So it's really refreshing every week to hear just different parts of immigration practice.
Excellent. Yeah, I was gonna actually add to that that I've never heard of an L1 blanket, and I think Gabby hasn't either. Right, Gabby? Yeah, and it's so cool that we've learned something new today. How about you, Roberto?
Yeah, it's always fun learning about new types of visas that I don't always get exposure to. I think immigration lawyers tend to pick a niche
Mhm.
and definitely
Yeah.
specialize in that. So for me, before getting into business migration, I was mostly doing humanitarian things like asylum, special immigrant juvenile, family-based adjustments, that type of thing. So being able to learn from an experienced attorney in this setting is amazing to me. uh, it's a really great opportunity.
Wonderful. Gabby.
Well, I'm always just a fly on the wall in these calls. Sometimes the opportunity kind of naturally comes up for me to talk about the software, but for now, I'm just really enjoying learning about Ashley and Roberto's personal practices, and it's just really great to have new faces on the call and learn about, like you said, L1B blanket petitions. I didn't know that you could get an approval for multiple people on one visa. That's really cool. And so I'm loving that we're bringing in some questions from the audience and getting some new perspectives and on the call. And I'd love to hear, maybe next week we can hear a little bit more about Roberto's humanitarian practice and talk more about the software. But for now, I'm just really happy to be here and say I got to learn a new thing today.
Thank you, Gabby. And then I'll leave John with our final closing word of the day. Right before I hand it over to you, John, though, they should make an EB1 blanket.
Well, you can't make an EB one.
Yeah.
The L's are interesting. It'd be interesting to have an H blanket, but the L's are the purpose behind it is a company is an international company.
But here's a question: if there was an H1 blanket, wouldn't that bring less work to immigration attorneys?
Still got to do it. I mean, there's still stuff to do. I mean, look, in my opinion, immigration's hard, and it's artificially hard. There are attorneys that say, well, that's why we have jobs, and that's true. And there was a former AILA president named Doug Stump, and something had happened. Everybody's bitching about it. He's like, don't you know that you guys' fees just went up? Everybody looked at each other, goes, oh yeah, I guess you're right. But we're on the sides of our clients, and so when things are hard or inconsistent, it's frustrating, right? I've made this analogy. I haven't made it for a while because this administration is a little different than the last one. But it's still, the site investigations and things like that are up because immigration's always hard. One of the things I've kind of said throughout my career is, construction guys know what the house is going to be like when they imagine it. They build it to what their specs are. And, most people know what they're going to do every day. We can be doing the 150th version of the same visa for the same company and get different result. And that's never understood by our clients. And I had that conversation today with when is this going to end? And I'm like, when is what going to end? Well, when are they going to quit hassling us about these things? I'm like, never. That won't end. It's always going to be like this, and that's why you hired us, right? And and the clients don't understand why they just can't get the next guy through. So I guess that's the pain we live in, but we chose that and chose to solve these problems.
And that's why technology will never replace lawyers.
That's right. That's
the
absolutely
empathy
right.
can never be replaced in the piece.
But it can certainly help.
It can certainly help.
Can organize it. Can I say my that wasn't really my parting thing. I would like to say something more global and positive. I've really enjoyed getting to know Ashley and Roberto in the last some period of time, and it's really neat because you guys have such diverse practices and diverse backgrounds, and we're all coming in and diverse amounts of time in our profession, and yet you're both doing new things, and that's life, right? I mean, I'm doing new things, and I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm always amazed in the way you guys just said about a new visa when I find something new. I did my first asylum case less than a year ago. 30s are into practicing law, and I found it really, really rewarding and very cool, and I was glad that we got ours approved. But man, it's tough, and I find some types of bodies like, oh, I'm glad I never did that. That's hard. I don't feel comfortable there. And then I love when we just have wonderful clients that appreciate us for what we do, and I love to see them get their visas. There's no better legal profession than the immigration one when it comes to that. And, that's why we call it delivering dreams. People give us way too much credit when they get approved, but it's fun to get to work with new people. And I'll leave it at that. I hope everybody has a great weekend.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you very much.